Good evening. My name's David Deal, and I'm happy to welcome you to the very last session of January Jumpstart. And today's session that you've joined is Forming Financial Security. I am joined by Chris DeCoke, and Chris will help us with all the administrative matters of this session. If you want to speak with Chris, please use the chat. If, on the other hand, you want to leave a question about the content, please put that in the Q&A box. So a little about me. I'm retired from Aurora University. I used to be the chief operating officer, and prior to that, for quite a few years, I was an accounting professor and a director of graduate business programs. So I have a long history here, and I'm really happy to be here and share with you some of my thoughts about what you need to do in order to prepare yourself for financial independence. So we're going to talk about what I've called forming financial security. And I think of security as being independent, having the ability to get on by yourself. Okay. And so to that end, we're going to talk about saving, investing, credit, risk management, and retirement. These are kind of the 5 points of financial independence. So there's 11 main points in this program. And by the way, you will receive either in chat or an email a copy of this presentation and a accompanying summary document that you can keep for yourselves. So the first thing we're going to talk about is your personal relationship with money. And we'll start talking about budgeting just a little bit. You may have been in a budgeting class before. We're going to talk about building savings into your budget, the 3 dimensions of savings, and why you must begin to save right away. I have a little lesson about John and Jane. And then we're going to talk about credit. Credit's scary, dangerous, but on the other hand, it's very helpful. And so we're going to have to talk about how you manage that. It's a dragon with a long tail, and you don't want to get hurt. We're going to also talk about retirement planning and risk management, which is really insurance. We'll also talk about a model that I've kind of put together that shows all the different things you got to do to save effectively and reach financial independence. And then when we wrap up, I'm going to show you a book that you maybe want to read to give some further guidance on how ordinary folks like you and me have the capacity to be financially independent. So with that, let's go dig right in and talk about your personal relationship with money and budgeting. Here's what I'm here to tell you, and I say it with all sincerity. You can achieve your reasonable objectives. I'm not saying necessarily that you're going to be a basketball star or create the next iPad or something like that and become rich that way. But if you have reasonable objectives for yourself and you do some really key things, you're going to be able to accumulate pretty good volume of wealth. So in order to do this, you need to accomplish 2 things. You've got to build a healthy relationship with your money, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then you need to do 5 things to keep it top of mind. One is to budget for savings. If you took the budgeting webinar, you know already that I've harped on it's important to include savings into your budget. You're going to learn today why it's really, really important to save and invest early and often, and to understand and prepare for retirement. Those 2 things go right hand in hand. Prepare for retirement just as you're getting out of college. You betcha you want to get started at that. You also want to take charge of your knowledge about and use of credit, because, as I said, credit can be very helpful, but credit can be very dangerous. And we want to take the danger out of the equation and make it helpful for you. And then finally, you've got to remember to manage your risk. So, do you have a relationship with money? Well, actually, you do. There's a whole field in finance called behavioral finance that seeks to explain why people do the things they do with money. And it all seems to wrap around the idea of values. What is important to you? Is obviously your family's probably important. Is it very important to have a big bank account? Very important to have job satisfaction, possessions, security? Well, how do you rank these if it's more than one? And I guarantee you it'll be more than one. Okay. Because though you can't probably achieve all of your preferred values, that means that you will have to make some choices. And you've got to decide what is most important to you. And then those values that you have, the things that are important to you, will help you inform your choices. So you've got to start to think now about what's really important to you. Now, I will tell you, as a young man, I thought I was going to make enough money to retire at 40. I probably made enough money to do it, but then I realized that really wasn't what I wanted. And so these things kind of change and you have to grow into them. But honestly, if you don't understand what's important to you, it's going to be hard to handle money effectively. So the other part of a relationship with money is ask yourself, how much money is enough? And I want to tell you about two people I know. One is a guy named Jim, and he is a sales executive with a big company. And I asked him one day this question: how much money is enough for you? And he says, well, I've got $2 million. I said, can you retire on that? And he said, oh, no, it's not near enough. And I said, well, how much do you need? He said, 5 million. Okay. I waited a while and he made the additional 3 million. And I said, so Jim, you've got your 5 million. You're going to retire? Oh, no, 5 million is not near enough. So 20 years later, this guy who was retirement age 20 years ago is still working because it's never enough, right? And you got to ask yourself if that's what you want in your life. I suggest that you set some goals for what you want and grow to that level. You know, if it gets bigger, that's great, but don't make that your sole objective because it'll consume your life. Now, I'll tell you about another man named John. And John never made an awful lot of money. He was a machinist at Caterpillar. And his wife was disabled and stayed at home, but she got some Social Security income. And these people were very careful about how they spent, and they did things together that they liked very much. And they had a great life. And I don't know, maybe they had $750,000 or something, and they were perfectly happy and content. It was because they had decided what was enough for them, and they spent to what they had. And imagine this, Jim having maybe $10 million and not being happy, and John and his wife having less than $1 million and being incredibly happy. And so this is really something for you to think about. How hard do you want to work to make this? And do you want to make it the sole focus of your life? Or do you want to do things with your family and have experiences and things like that? So this is where you need to start deciding what's important to you. Because what we're going to talk about now, as we talk about more about savings and accumulating money and things like that, is really dependent on you. And it's for you. And nobody can tell you it's wrong if it's okay with you. That makes some sense. All right. Well, so here's the thing. Be sure that this is what you got to do if you're going to make this work. You got to build savings into your budget, and you got to pay yourself first. If you don't do that, you're never going to accumulate any money. And the key here is to budget to spend less than you make so that you've got something left over to set aside. And I think I've said this in some other groups, but saving is a matter of muscle memory. Once you train yourself to do it, and it takes a little while, once you train yourself to do it, and you start to see some results and you start to earn some interest and things like that, you will start to just automatically save. and it becomes a habit. It's something you just do. And so be sure to make that saving a priority. Okay. And we'll talk about where to save and what to save in and all of that in a bit. Remember not to become a victim of lifestyle creep. Remember, lifestyle creep is when you get a pay raise and you spend more than your pay raise going forward, right? Your lifestyle grows more than your capacity to earn does. Pay yourself first. We've talked about that already. And then learn to discern if an expenditure is a want or a need. I want a Bentley. I'll probably drive a Cadillac. Okay. I need a new shirt. I want a custom made shirt, right? It's easy to discern what those wants and needs are. It's harder to manage yourself around them. And so you all have the capacity to do that. And I hope you will consider it and do that. And then finally, sometimes you're going to have to get back on track. Okay, you're going to blow a budget. You're not going to be able to save something 1 month, or you'll have a crisis. The car needs a new catalytic converter. I live in St. Louis. They steal catalytic converters like every day there. I don't understand. But you're going to have to do something. It's going to be unhappy. So when that happens, don't give up. Just straighten it out and move on, right? And one of the ways to do that is persistently cut costs and persistently save. So persistently cut costs. At my age, I'm 65. At my age, I'm still cutting costs. I got a new cell phone plan that's half the price of my old one. It's kind of a strange plan, but anyway, it's half the price of my old one and it works okay. I finally cut the cord on my cable company and I'm streaming 100% now. You guys probably do that automatically, but that's kind of a big deal for somebody like me. I've learned to keep checking to make sure I'm not paying for things twice. And I found out that I was paying Adobe twice for my Acrobat subscription. And so I took care of that. They actually refunded it, by the way, which was really cool. So you got to take care of the savings money that you have or that you might be able to create. Okay. So I would like to do the first poll if we could, Chris. You must build savings into your budget to achieve personal and financial independence. True or false? And so the true is what I believe is correct. In other words, that you do have to build savings into your budget to achieve independence. That's not just my thinking. That's the thinking of many people who are very successful in business and have also come to the same conclusion and recommend this to their clients. So how are we going to save? 3 dimensions, right? You've probably seen this before. The first one is the emergency fund. The second one is for specific, well, let's go back to the emergency fund. You ought to try to save between 3 and 6 months of your income so that if something horrible happens, like you get fired or, and it happens to everybody, it's happened to me. If you get fired or there's some sort of automobile problem or somebody gets sick, you can handle it without having to resort to means that are expensive like credit. You want to save for specific purposes. For example, a down payment on a house, maybe a new car or something like that. Or you also need to save, and these are not ors, these are ands. Okay. You need to save for retirement. We're going to talk more about that in just a minute. Regular savings, and more especially the returns earned on your savings, are going to make you independent. But there's a trick. You got to try not to spend your savings unless you really have to. Okay. And sometimes you do really have to. I had a medical problem this past year. I had to find $10,000 to take care of, and I did, and it made me angry, but I had to do it, and I did it, and I'll recover that savings over time. Fortunately, I'm still here to do this. Okay, so let's talk about those earnings. Why do you have to start saving now? Well, I don't want to just tell you myself. I want to have an expert tell you how math can work for you to your favor. Let's ask him. And that expert is Albert Einstein. In a recent, well, maybe 10 years ago, biography of Albert Einstein by Walter Isaacson, he made this quote from Einstein: compound interest, which could also be defined as investment return, is the most powerful force in the universe. And now I'm going to show you why. First of all, we have to understand what is return. Return can take a number of different forms. It could be interest from a bank. It could be dividends from stocks or a mutual fund. It could be interest from a bond. There's all kinds of different ways that we can get returns. It could also be what are called capital gains. I actually produced a little of that this morning. So I sold some stock this morning, and I sold it for a little bit more than I paid for it. That little bit more is what's called a capital gain, but that's part of your return. Okay. So you earn that by investing, and it comes paid in two ways: simple interest and compound interest. Simple interest, very simply, is paid to the depositor and never reinvested. Compound interest, on the other hand, is paid to the depositor and then reinvested, so that the next time an interest payment comes out or a return payment comes out, you get return not only on your original investment, but on the past interest as well. Hopefully, if you're a mathematics kind of person, you can see that this is going to be an exponential curve, and the earnings will grow really fast once you get started. Okay. So an example, simple interest. Let's say you put $10,000 in the bank. Well, okay, we all know 5% interest is a fairy tale at the bank right now, right? Right now, the banks are paying more like 1%, but 5% is easy for me to do in my head, so bear with me. 10%, $10,000 at 5% annual interest, and at the end of the year, the bank hands you $500. Okay. Instead of reinvesting that interest, you put $500 down on a horse and you lose, right? Okay. The money is spent. You've spent it instead of reinvesting it, so you still have $10,000. And the next year, you're going to get $500 again. And you're going to go buy a big bag of chocolate, and the money is spent, and you still have $10,000. And the same thing's going to happen the third year, and your money never grows. And that's too bad, because there's another approach. And that other approach is what's called compound interest, as we discussed. So let's talk about this. Let's say you invest $10,000 at 5% interest, same thing. At the end of the first year, you receive a $500 interest payment, and you combine your interest payment with the original investment. Now you have $10,500 because you didn't spend your $500 interest, right? At the end of the next year, you get $525 interest, which is interest on both the original $10,000, $500, and the previously earned interest of $500, which is the $25 in interest. So you get $525. So you can see this grows, and it grows initially fairly small way, but it grows rapidly. And if you're anything like me, you're going to ask the question, so Dave, $25 isn't a big deal, so what makes compound interest so special? Time is what makes compound interest special. It requires patience, but here's what happens. Say you put that $10,000 in at 5%, and you leave it for 30 years. Now all of a sudden you have $43,219. It doubled twice, right? In general, you can see the computation and the formula for this, and I guarantee you it works because I tried 3 or 4 times just to be sure. But you can see that that grows, but there's a further problem here. It takes 30 years to make $10,000 turn into 43,000. How do I get rich, right? Because 43,000 is a lot of money and it's a good thing, but you're not going to live on it for long. So there's a trick. The key is systematic investing or regular investing. So think of it this way. Consider somebody who works from the age of 22 to 65, 43 years. And each year they save $6,000. Why did I use that number? It's because that's the maximum allowable that at the time, I think they went up this year, maximum allowable for IRA, okay, individual retirement account. So in 43 years, they would have put aside $258,000, but it turns out because of compound interest, that is not what their account is worth. Their account's actually worth $858,000. So in this case, we turned $258,000 into $858,000, which is a pretty dramatic number, okay? The key here is that every year you got to make a contribution. And you don't have to do it annually. You can do it monthly. You can do it quarterly. Some other schedule is fine, but I'm just using annual here to make the discussion fairly easy. So I still haven't gotten to $1 million, have I? It's 857,000. Well, if we want $1 million, we're going to have to figure out how to get a return of 5.57%. That'll get you right to $1 million. Okay. But here's the good news. In the past 90 plus years, that is to say, from the time of the Great Depression until now, the average return, interest, dividends, capital gains, in a market basket of diverse investments has returned about 8%. Okay. That is the statistic. At an 8% return, that's $6,000 a year turns into almost $2 million. Now that, I hope, gets your attention. This is significant. And when we talk about retirement in a little bit, you'll see why it's especially significant. All right. So we're going to go to the lesson of John and Jane, or John. So Jane invests $6,000 annually at 8% return from age 23 to age 65. That's a total of $252,000. And at age 65, Jane's going to have about $1.8 million. Okay. John is a miscreant, and he decides he wants to run around for the first 20 years of his career or so and spend money on travel and dining and shows and all sorts of good things and not fund his retirement. But he says, I have a plan. And my plan is that after 20 years, I will double my contribution from $6,000 to $12,000 a year. And he, in fact, does that. So John invests also a total of $252,000. But at age 65, John will only have $605,000. Why? Because for 20 years, he was not earning interest. You only earn interest for the time period that it's in the market, right? So if John were to catch up to Jane after waiting 20 years, he would have to invest over $36,000 a year for his remaining 20 years. And that's not probably something that's going to happen. Okay. So when I say start early and invest often, this is the reason why. If you start putting money away now and you get the muscle memory to do that, and you consistently do it for a lengthy period of time, and you don't have to dip into it too much, you too have the potential to have a very, very large account. Okay. Chris, do you think we could have the next poll? Yep. So, well, okay, so there's two I want to do. So for the best result in your savings plan, start to save early and be sure to save regularly. The answer that I have envisioned is true. Okay. And that's what all of my colleagues and the behavioral finance people that I read have to say. Invest early and often. Okay. So let's close that. And then could I have the next poll, please, also? Okay, this is the John and Joan poll. Two people start a career at the same time. Joan saves 6,000 a year for 40 years. John saves zero for the first 20 years and 12,000 a year for the next 20 years. Which of the following statements is true? So the bulk of you have selected the right answer, which is that Joan will have saved more. That's the illustration that we have up on the screen right now, actually. In order for John to meet Joan, remember, he would have to put aside 6 times as much per year as Joan did for his remaining years. It's really a big deal. Okay. So procrastination is not an option. Now, I understand there was a procrastination webinar, and hopefully this shows you one of the reasons that procrastination is not an option. Jane won big. Jane won big here. Okay. All right. So this lesson of time value of money is critical. And one of the questions that I've gotten in previous seminars is, where in the heck do you find an 8% return today? So let me give you a little insight on that. So you go to the bank and you like I said, you get a percent maybe. You got US government I bonds, which are paying about 6.5%. That's pretty good. But there are certain stocks whose dividends pay between 4 and 6% that are very solid stocks. And the balance of it is going to come from your capital gains. In other words, you buy something at one price and you sell it for a higher price. And so there's a complex mix to all of this. The important thing right now is not that you get 8%. The important thing right now is that you go ahead and get started. Okay. What's my recommendation for where you should put your money right now? Put it in a bank account. Safe, it's secure, it's easily accessible if you happen to need it. As your nest egg grows, what you can do is go buy a government I bond, and that's not a big deal. You just go to treasurydirect.gov and you get an account and sign up, and you can buy an I bond online. As I say, they're paying about 6.5% right now. It changes a little bit every 6 months, and you have to hold it for a year to get the full value of the interest rate, which is a pretty good rate. There's also limitations on how much of it you can own. I think an individual can only hold 10,000 at a time, but that's going to carry you for a couple, 3 years while you're sort of getting underway. So those two things would be the best places to start. After that, you're going to need some help, and you're going to go into the markets a little bit. We'll talk about that a little bit later. All right. Credit is what I want to address next. And this is always a little controversial. I believe, as do many others, that you should only use credit for appreciating assets. What's that mean? First of all, an asset is a thing of value, and appreciating assets are things that grow in value. So I don't mind having a loan on a home. because by and large, loans or homes go up in value if you keep them for a while. I don't approve necessarily of having a depreciating asset, one that loses value over time, be financed with credit. So I can give you some really bizarre examples. One is I see people use credit cards, for example, to buy groceries. Groceries do not get better with time, right? And that is something you got to pay for, and you're just going to eat and it's going to be gone, and you're still going to have the lingering bill. Great, right? I don't necessarily approve of that. But more common things that we see are people using credit to buy cars. And I get that cars are expensive, and especially as you start off in your career, you're probably going to need a little help to do that. But let me tell you a little trick. Let's say you buy a car on credit and you make your payments, you do the right thing, and eventually you pay the car off. Don't go buy another car right away. Take those payments then and start putting them in a bank account, so that when you build up enough money, you can go buy a car for cash, and you just keep making payments to yourself, right? I bought one car on credit, and since then I bought all my other cars for cash, and that was the way I did it. And I saved myself thousands and thousands of dollars by not paying interest on automobile loans. And that's particularly important because automobiles also do not get better with age. Okay. So if you use a credit card, always pay your balances in full if you can. I recognize that sometimes something's going to cause a problem and you're going to have a balance you got to carry for a little while. But you don't want to do that long, because credit card interest rates are enormous. I have one of the best credit cards out there, and it's 12.99%. That's 13%. That's twice the amount of a home mortgage right now, right? We have had students in this segment that have said that they've got credit cards up to 30% interest, right? And I believe that. My brother was in that situation. So always pay your balances off in full if you can. There's a good question here. It says, what if the credit card I use gives me 1 to 5% back cash back for my purchases? Is it worth it? Well, I think if you pay your bill in full, it's well worth it, right? But if you don't have the discipline or the ability to pay your bill in full every month, you're giving them, say 15% interest to get 1 to 5% back. That's probably not worth it. Okay. You'd be better off paying cash. So it's a complex question, and it depends on the individual. Another one's come in. It says, when it comes to buying cars on credit, what do you do if you do not make enough money to buy it in cash, but you still need a car? Well, that's the case I talked about. I mean, when I was a young accountant back in 1982, I actually had to buy a car, and I didn't have the cash because I hadn't gotten very far in my savings journey. And so I did, in fact, get a loan to buy the car. But that was where I started. When I made the payments on the loan, I kept that car like 10 years. And I made the payments on the loan, paid the car off in 4 years. In the next 6 years, I paid the car payment to me, so that when I bought my next car, I could pay cash for it, right? And that's how you want to set it up for yourself. There's another good one here. Is it better to pay off my balance immediately, or pay it off in payments, or wait to pay it off closer to the due date? My credit card takes my length of credit into my FICO score. Well, when you say pay it immediately, I would say if you pay it by the due date, it's probably just fine. I don't pay. I use American Express cards sometimes, and I pay it all every month, pay it off completely. And I always pay it on the due date, because I don't like to give people money ahead of time if I can help it. And my credit score is pretty good. So that's the way I would approach that, I think. And then there's a question that says, what would you consider good credit? I assume you're asking about a FICO score. Most retailers, automobile dealers, and so forth call 700 a minimally acceptable score. So better than 700, I would say. Okay. Now, the next big question, I'm sure it's going to come up, is how do you build your credit and how do you improve your FICO score? And I'm going to tell you, you need to be more concerned about building your wealth than building your credit, because you got to remember where these scores come from. They come from the credit agencies that are funded by, guess who? The credit card companies, right? And the credit card companies want you to buy more stuff so that they can charge you more interest. And the scores, the credit scores reflect that. Often the scores will go up if you buy more stuff and have a bigger balance. I got burned up one day because I checked my credit score and then I paid a big bill that was sitting out there. My credit score went down because I paid that big bill. Okay. So one more question on this. It says, how is it that credit card companies consolidate multiple credit cards together? So it requires you to do a little work. It's not a bad idea if you can get a better rate. It requires you to do a little work in that you set up the new account and then they have a means of transferring the balance from your existing account to the new account. Sometimes you can do that with a low rate for a while, right? Okay. Why did my score go down when you paid your bill? Because I didn't have as much credit outstanding. And one of the ways they measure your value as a credit customer is having a lot of credit outstanding, which seems kind of perverse to me. I don't recommend specific credit cards because I think you have to make that call for yourself. But let me give you a little box to think about. If you don't have credit card yet, a place to start is with an oil card, like BP. I keep wanting to call them Amoco because that's what it was when I was a kid, like BP. And ask them to give you a low credit limit, like $500, because you're not going to get in a ton of trouble with a $500 credit limit, right? And pay that off and do well with it, and you'll build a credit score that way. And then maybe over time you add a charge card. There's a difference. A credit card you can carry a balance on. A charge card you have to pay in full every month or they shut you down. And the most common charge card I know is American Express. Okay. I'm not real familiar. I've seen ads for Credit Karma, but I'm really not familiar with it. I think if they're trying to help you increase your credit score, I don't know. I would be concerned about how they get paid to understand, and I don't know how they get paid to help you increase that. Is it from the user? Is it from the credit card companies, or what? It's always to me, it's always a follow the money kind of thing to figure out who wins. And I just am not too familiar with Credit Karma. All right. So this bottom quote is actually from my father, who instilled in me a lot of financial conservatism. And his big mantra was, I'd rather earn interest than pay interest. And I agree with that personally. It will help you maximize the outcomes of your saving, right? You want to try to keep that credit. Credit's just a reality. We all have to have a little bit of it. But if you keep it under control, it's not a bad thing. If it gets out of control, it can really wreck your life. And I will have to tell you a sad story, which is that my brother had some $75,000 in credit card debt, and I had to help him through a bankruptcy. And then he did it again, and I helped him through another bankruptcy, and the stress of it all killed him. This is this is a really difficult situation, and you have to, it's serious. You got to be careful about credit. And so I'd ask you to just kind of keep that in mind. If you're okay, if you're good with it, it can be helpful. If you're not good with it, it's going to hurt you. Okay. So there was a couple of credit behaviors that will help you succeed. The first one is pay cash as much as possible. Why? Well, when I say cash, I mean cash or a debit card. Okay. Green folding stuff, when I have to hand that over the counter to somebody, it hurts my heart. And so I know what I've bought, and it's harder for me to part with my money. And it makes that spending very real. But when I put green folding stuff across the teller window at the bank, I feel great, right? Because I know that I'm growing my wealth. It actually helps most people. Using cash helps most people be better at conforming to their budget, and that makes them better at saving because they're more likely to have saved some. So the other thing is about credit cards. I mean, like I said, they're a reality, and we've got to face reality. I do use one. I have a total of 2 credit cards. Done. I have one American Express and I have one MasterCard, and that's it. They encourage you to optionally spend. What do I mean by that? Well, if I get that credit card in my pocket, I got a little bit of buying power. And if I see something that I think is cool, I might just buy it, where if I didn't have the cash in my pocket, I wouldn't. So if I have, it goes back to planning and discipline. Credit cards will encourage you to make consequences of your purchases emotionally remote, and that encourages you to buy more stuff on credit. The other thing that you need to know is that credit card interest rates, as I said, are quite high. Even a very good credit card that I have is 12.99%. That's high. And as evidenced by my brother's situation, they can be addictive. Now you can lay that off to a character defect in his case, and that may be true, but I've seen way too many people have problems with credit, and I've had to help way too many people work their way through a bankruptcy. So this is just something to think about. So I want to show you a credit card example just to make this real. About this time last year, well, actually it was 2 years ago now, I had a big dental problem. And my dentist said, I can fix it, but it's going to cost you $8,000. And my first reaction was not nice words, but I thought, well, I got an emergency fund. I could use that and pay myself back. And I've got a credit card that's got a high enough credit limit that I could pay the dentist. So I said, well, I'm gonna use my emergency fund. So if I had used my credit card, I would have paid the dentist $8,000. I'd have had credit card interest at 12.99% with a minimum monthly payment of $150. It would take 7 years to pay off that dental work. And at my age, I haven't got 7 years. Okay. And the interest cost would be $4,000, 50% of the total dental cost. So, and that all assumes that you didn't buy anything else on the credit card in the meantime, right? This is high cost stuff. So I did pay him with cash from my emergency fund, which I repaid myself. And I thought, if I'm going to pay him cash, he kind of wins. So I said, listen, Mr. Dentist, if I pay you cash and I write you a check today, will you give me a discount? And he hemmed and hawed and thought about it for a while. And he said, okay. if you pay me cash today, I'll give it to you for $6,400. So not only did I save the $4,000 in interest, but I saved another $1,600 by driving the price down by paying cash, which many people will do. Win-win, right? If you have credit card debt, particularly big credit card debt, your first priority is not to save money. Your first priority is to get your debt paid off. Okay. And when you think about it, paying off your debt is like saving money because it increases your overall wealth. Remember, debt is a decrease of your overall wealth. And when you pay it down, you increase your overall wealth. Okay. I got a couple of, looks like I've got some nice questions here. One of them asks, would it make more sense to put smaller bills on credit cards to start building a credit score? For example, someone who doesn't have credit, or should I put my regular larger bills on credit? You know what? I don't think the size of the bill matters as long as you pay it off in full each month. If you can pay them off, it's okay to use a credit card to do it, but you got to be sure that you actually pay them off each time, right? The next question here says, is taking out a loan to pay off credit card debt a smart idea? That's complicated. This is something which actually has a name. It's called arbitrage, and it's trading one rate for another, right? So if you can get a loan for a smaller rate than what you're paying the credit card company, it's not a bad idea, right? But what you got to do is quit using a credit card until you pay it off. All right. Now there is a method that people suggest for that. And that method is to put your credit card in a bowl of water and put it in the freezer. I know that sounds stupid, but it works because you can't get it out, right? You got to, bust the ice up. You could do it, but you got to work at it. And if you're working at it, you're going to start thinking twice about, does this make any sense? Right? So that's that. One person says they have substantial credit card debt. Should I file for bankruptcy? Not necessarily. You have to look at your whole financial picture. Sometimes if I had substantial credit card debt, I wouldn't file bankruptcy. I'd figure out a way to use some of my assets to pay it. If you have assets that you might be able to pay it with, then I wouldn't file bankruptcy. If you are having trouble making the payments, or the payments are preventing you from living a life of relative ease, then you might consult a bankruptcy attorney to see what they think. But remember, how do the bankruptcy attorneys get paid? By people declaring bankruptcy, right? The number that I saw didn't strike me as unattainable to pay off. It's just that it's going to be a pain until you get it done. And for you, the challenge right now wouldn't be saving. It would be paying down that debt, which is tantamount to saving because you won't owe it anymore. Okay. So one last one here. It says, what percent? Well, can we hold the investment portfolio question for a little bit? I'm going to leave that one for a minute because we're going to get there in just a minute. Okay. So I think I've made my point on the credit cards, and I want to move on to retirement and then some investment, risk management and investment. So on retirement, years ago, employers would contribute to a retirement plan for everybody. And you didn't really have to. And when you finally retired, you got a pension for the rest of your life, sometimes insurance too. And that got so expensive that the employers quit doing that. So those plans really almost no longer exist now, except for government employees of the state and local governments, and also for educators. you'll probably qualify for Social Security unless you work for the governments. And assuming that Social Security isn't changed by Congress, but the thing you need to know is that Social Security number is not very big. I mean, it's not horrible, but it'll cramp your lifestyle if that's the only thing you've got. So the bottom line is this: to assure a comfortable retirement, you'll have to plan and save for it. And there's two plans I want to bring to your attention because they'll be potentially important to you. The first one is called a Roth individual retirement account. In this account, you take money and contribute up to $6,500 a year. And this does not decrease your taxes or anything like that. It's after-tax money. You put $6,500 into the plan, and it grows tax-free until you take it out. And when you take it out, you don't pay any taxes. So think about Joan and Jim, or whatever I called them. If you put $6,500 a year in for 40 years and you got a decent return on it, you're going to have pretty close to a couple $1,000,000. And you can then take out that money bit by bit and not pay any tax on it. That's pretty attractive, because all of those earnings, all of those compound interest payments, they're not taxed. Okay. And that's a beautiful thing. Now, so that's a good plan. It has a couple other advantages, one of which is that if you don't use it, you can pass it on in your estate to your family, and they don't have to pay any tax on it either. Okay. Secondly, the employer-sponsored 401k plan or 403b plan. 401k is for a for-profit business. 403b is for a not-for-profit. Those are code numbers or section numbers in the Internal Revenue Code is what those numbers stand for. So the employer sets up a plan with an independent trustee, and then you make contributions from your pay. It's withdrawn directly from your paycheck. And you can put up to $22,500 a year in there, unless you're over 50, in which case you can put something like $27,500 in. And the contribution is then excluded from your taxable income for the year that you make it. So you get a win right up front. Here's the other thing that works with these. Typically, the employer will match a portion of your employee contributions. Let me give you an example. Here at AU, for the first 5% of your income that you put into the 403b, AU will contribute another 6%. And that is a very attractive proposition. Okay, it's only available to full-time employees for those of you as student workers. Okay, but it is a way to gather some, in quotation marks, free money toward your retirement plan. And look at that number, 22.5. Imagine 22.5 for 40 years. You're not going to do that much in your early earning years, because that would just put you out of business. But as you get further along in your career, you might be able to do that. Let's say somebody did happen to put 22.5 in for 40 years with that kind of return. It would be several $1,000,000 that they would have when they got ready to retire. This is a powerful, powerful plan. The downside to this plan is that when you take the money out, first of all, you have to be 59 and a half to take it out. But the downside is you do pay tax on this one. Okay. So these are the kinds of things you would do to fund your retirement. Okay. I want to talk very briefly. I know we're running out of time. I want to talk very briefly about risk management. It's insurance, right? And you know you got to have insurance for your car, and probably understand that you need to have renter's insurance or insurance for your home and so forth. But there's a couple other things you need to worry about. If you are a professional, say a nurse, an accountant, an educator, you may also want to carry professional liability insurance, because sometimes if you get sued, your employer will cover you and sometimes they won't. So having professional liability insurance will help you with that. And then the other thing is that you need to have some life insurance to help provide for your family after your death. And that sounds like that's remote. And I got a story on that too. When I was age of 31, I didn't have life insurance and I had a heart attack, and I recovered from that. But guess what? I can't get now? Life insurance, right? So I think that not at any price, by the way. I mean, I can't even pay a big price and get it. So you want to think about that for your family. You're going to do that with the help of an insurance professional, and I am not one, that will help you select appropriate coverage limits and providers. But remember to put the cost of your insurance in your budget. And it is possible to overinsure yourself so that you're paying too much in premiums. So you really want to be careful of that when you work with your trusted advisor. Okay. Now we get to this question of investment strategy. Okay. So we've talked about the 3 buckets for investment. Here are the places that you can save and invest. And here's my recommendation. You should start off on the left side of the screen with bank accounts, CDs, and money markets. They're very low risk. They have a defined return. You know what's going to happen. The next thing I would do is add some United States government securities. There's U.S. savings bonds, but the I series that has a good return. Okay. After that, and you can do both of those things on your own. You just go to the bank or you go to the Treasury Direct and you can work that out on your own. It's not difficult. But then you get to mutual funds, stocks, and bonds. This is a little more complex because you got to make picks, and there's thousands of them out there to buy from. My advice for most investors is just to pick mutual funds, which is a big collection of all kinds of different stocks and securities and so forth, and you buy a slice of that whole big collection. And it's professionally managed, and you don't have to fiddle with it every day. That's not a bad approach to use. These securities give the best returns and but they have the greatest risk of loss. That's why you have to have a professional help you with it. You want to pay attention to what's called diversification. You don't want to have too much of the same thing, because if it goes down, it hurts you too badly. The next thing I would focus on after mutual funds, stocks, and bonds is real estate. I mean, rental real estate there. And then lastly, there's some things you don't want to do. I would stay away from options because it requires a ton. Be good at calculus if you're going to fiddle around with options, because it requires a ton of attention and a lot of knowledge, and you're still going to lose half the time. Remember, for every winner in the stock market, there's a loser, right? Futures and commodities are also dangerous. So futures is when you basically make a purchase in the future for a set price, and you can win or lose on that. Commodities are really ugly. Imagine you buy the option on a rail car cooking oil, right? And you can't find somebody to buy it, and your contract expires. Guess what you got in your backyard? You got a rail car cooking oil, right? That's dangerous. So you want to use these first 4. That would be the bank accounts, U.S. government securities, mutual funds, stocks, bonds, and real estate as your core investments. And you start small, and you keep adding and adding and adding. Okay. Now I want to answer a few questions here quickly. What percentage of your investment portfolio should be under high-risk assets, for example, individual stocks or crypto? I would say I have 80% of my investments in individual stocks, okay? But I manage them carefully, and I have a level of knowledge that is a little different than most people's, and I have a strong risk tolerance. Most people do not. I would say that if you want to take a flyer on some things, you want to keep it down to 20% or less of your portfolio. And I want to tell you that I am not a fan of cryptocurrency, and you can see why in the recent news about, I think it's FTX. I'm not convinced that there's an underlying value to crypto. I understand that blockchain, and actually I think there's some value to blockchain, but I don't think that cryptocurrency is something I would put money into. Somebody asks, when should one apply for a 401k plan? When you get into your professional life, you should apply for it from your employer as soon as they offer it to you. The sooner, the better. Okay. A Roth IRA, how many years would I have to invest to get $1 million, and how much a year? Well, roughly speaking, it would be the John and Jim example. So you could put up to $6,500 a year. I would guess it would take about 35 years. And you can't put more than that in because the law doesn't permit it. Can you explain debt investment? It's a term I've heard in my finance class. I don't know if it's a good deal or a good idea. It's okay. So debt investment is when you buy a bond. So company doesn't want to issue new stock, and so they need money. So what they say is, okay, we're going to borrow from you money, and we're going to give you a bond or our promise to repay it, and we're going to pay you interest, usually semi-annually. You can buy debt that's pretty good, very good. I've bought some over the years, and I think it's okay. What I would recommend is don't buy individual debt securities because they're very volatile to interest rates. It's better to buy a debt mutual fund, and those are far less volatile. But debt's a good thing. Not debt for you, debt securities. Loaning money to these corporations is a good thing. Okay. Credit unions. I think credit unions are terrific because they pay higher rates of interest and they don't charge so much interest. But you want to make sure you use one that's insured by the federal insurance agency. Okay. I am not going to explain options today. That really is a calculus based program. And I think that most people should not be in options. I do not play in options, even though I know how they work. It's just dangerous. When do you recommend starting life insurance? When you have a family to protect, a wife and children and so forth. What life insurance do you recommend? Well, I don't recommend any particular life insurance. I just think you need to check to make sure the company is sound, and you shouldn't pay more than you can afford. Okay. What you do is you look at how much, for example, an old measure is how much do I make in a year? Let's say you make $50,000 a year. Maybe you buy 2 times that for life insurance as a start. But over time, remember that your family's needs will go up and you may need to add some to it. Better to buy it younger than buy it older, because it gets more expensive as you age and you get to a point where you can't buy it at all. They won't sell. I'm 65. They won't sell it to me, even if I was healthy. Because guess what's going to happen, right? That's too much of a risk for them. When would you, I thought that said clipping your toes. When would you consider to be a good time to begin dipping your toes into more risky investment styles? You got to you have to at least get your emergency fund set before you start going into anything more risky. And then you can start to do that. Last question I'm going to answer. It says, if you had $50,000, how would you invest it? Short answer, I would put 20% of it in cash. I would put 60% of it into 5-star mutual funds. That's not a brand, that's a rating. Okay. And I would put the balance of it in individual stocks. Are we headed into a recession? I can't help but answer this. Yeah, of course we are. I don't think it's going to be a bad one, by the way, but it looks like it's on the way. And in fact, the Federal Reserve's even saying that now. Okay, just a couple more things to wrap this up. You're going to need advisors. Just be careful that you pick good ones. How do you do that? You go to your family, your friends, your business associates, and see what they think. And then you interview a few and you find one you're comfortable with. I've had the same advisor that I use for 25 years. And you grow old together, and you trust each other. And that is what you're looking for. This is the key. You're not going to become financially independent overnight, but if you consistently save, carefully invest, and patiently steward your money, you can be at the top of the heap. You will be in the top 1%, right? Most people do not do this stuff. And what's that going to yield for you? Financial independence and more means than you're ever going to require in your life. These are the things that make financial success, this puzzle. And Chris is going to upload this for you or send it out in email so you can have access to that. And that's going to give you success. And lastly, I want you to get this book and read it. It's called The Millionaire Next Door. And it's by Stanley and Danko. It's not an expensive book. It's $12 to $16, something like that. This tells the story of a variety of millionaires and how they got there. And you're going to find out it's by managing their spending. And most of the millionaires in the United States are people that own businesses. And you will be amused to know that the most common vehicle among millionaires in the United States is a Ford F-150 pickup truck. And that's not ostentation. That is practicality, because these people are mostly business owners and they use those trucks in their business. Okay. You don't know, sometimes you see somebody and you think, I wonder how they're doing, and you just don't know. Lots of times people that look like they have very modest lives are very, very well set. And that is what we're talking about here. I want you all to be as comfortable as any of these millionaires in The Millionaire Next Door. Now, I'm giving you my contact information. If you have questions, you can, I don't work at the university anymore. I live in St. Louis. If you have questions, you can give me a call or send me an email, and I'll be happy if I can to try to answer you or tell you that I don't know. Okay. But a lot of these things that you might ask are going to be specific to your own personal circumstances. And without having a real good grip on that, I'm not going to be able to answer very carefully. So I just want you to know that you may hear an "it depends" from me, because I have to tell that to my clients quite a bit. And but you're certainly welcome to reach out if there's something you want to dive into, and we can talk about that. As I said, I was a professor here a long time, and I really want to assist our students any way I can. So that brings us to the end, and I appreciate your attention and your interest. I see your interest in the questions that we saw, and I want to wish you a terrific spring semester and the balance of your time here at AU, and happy and successful careers and lives. So all the best to everybody, and thanks very much for being here. So long.